Thank you.
Did I say your name?
No.
We'll figure it out. It's amazing. We talk about how much things go together here, even when we don't plan them. And like Stephen with that song and the chorus, that's also the chorus for my talk today. So when I get to that part, just feel free to jump in. She mentioned I did just get back from a trip to Korea where I was on an exchange program working with people with disabilities. That was just, an outstanding event for me. And of course, way too much to really talk about much here. I'll hit on it just a little bit in the talk, but it was an exciting experience for me. I got to have large Korean meals for pretty much every lunch and dinner, where you have all kinds of little platters set all over and you're eating them. My last meal was chopped up octopus in a hot sauce. It was interesting. My Korean is pretty much annyeonghaseyo, which means hello. I was interviewed by a television station. Her English was pretty much hello, which means annyeonghaseyo. And so it was an interesting experience because this pretty young anchor who's sitting here at the table with me, and we're in this little room, and we each have these little earplugs in. So she would ask me a question in Korean, and we're being filmed, so I'm smiling and nodding like I have any idea what's going on. And then they would translate it to me through my earpiece in English, although sometimes I could hear them talking about it, trying to figure out exactly what to say, and I'm thinking about what my answer is going to be. And then I would get the translation, so I would say it in English, and she, being a professional, would smile at me and nod, having no clue what I'm talking about, and then they would give her the answer in Korean. I have no idea if either of us were ever talking about the same thing. It all seemed to come out. But it was a great trip. I got back here just last week and, dove into what's going on here, which is affirmations, of course, for this month. And I always take my own approach to all of these things. So for me, it's kind of like, well, why would affirmations work? I mean, let's think about it. Why in the world would what we think in our minds affect anything else in the world? So as I thought that through, one of the things we're told often is our thoughts have effect when you have a lot of emotion behind them. And that's what gives them this power to have effect. I've pretty well disproved that. The Kansas City Chiefs haven't won the Super Bowl for about 40 years. I get really emotional about those games, and it does no good at all. Truthfully, I think that a lot of people get emotional, sometimes way too emotional about a lot of their thoughts, and I don't think that that's the factor that has the effect on it. And sometimes I think we kind of cheat on this, I have to say it, because people will say affirmations and something else will happen and we'll say, well, that's what they really wanted. Well, maybe, but I could control everything that way. If I wait till something happens and then I say, that's what I was thinking of, then I'm always right. So I'm not sure that that solves this either. So as I thought about it, I was thinking about one of the things I did. Mostly what I did over there was visit with other agencies who were providing services for people with disabilities. One of them was a man who had set up this little tent in the subway station, and he had been there for 374 days as part of a protest. It was a very different approach for things. But anyway, the other part was I also did some cultural activities, and I went to a museum, the Korean National Museum. And I was fortunate I was able to get a tour in English and saw lots of fascinating things. But one of them was statues of Buddha, and a whole different series of statues of the Buddha, and told us some background about it. It was interesting. First of all, the idea that she said that the Buddha said before he passed away, "Do not make a statue of me." Very directly, "Do not make a statue of me because you should not worship me. I am not some god that you worship." And the people listened to him for about 150 years until Alexander the Great showed up, and they had lots of beautiful statues of gods and goddesses, and that caught on so much that at that point they started making statues of the Buddha. Often with famous people, like there's this one king who has his face. Often statues of Buddha that you'll see from India at that time have the face of some king who decided he should be the Buddha. We don't follow the teachings of our spiritual leaders very well, apparently. But the other interesting thing about those statues was they talked about they're often named based on how the hands are being held. And there were a whole series of them, and some of you are probably familiar with this. One of them is the statues, the hands are sort of cradled in front, and that's the meditative Buddha. A display of meditation. And there was one where one hand is cradled and the other hand points down. And that's the meditation foundation in the earth, if you will. But to me, the really interesting one was they said there's a number of statues with the Buddha with his thumb on a finger. Now, many of you are familiar with that with certain types of meditating. But what they said this was, it depended not only on what finger the thumb was on, but on the position of the hand, whether it was down or up. And that was a form of counting. So it's 1, 2, 3, and if you get back up here, it's going up to 7, 5, 8. And which number is being counted reflects the consciousness level of the audience the Buddha is addressing. And so the lower the number, the higher the consciousness of the audience. So if you have a Buddha statue whose hand's up in the air and his thumb is on one of these fingers, he's addressing a group with a very low level of consciousness. I thought, well, that seemed a little judgmental. But I thought about that and thought, this isn't about judgment, it's about truth. I mean, we all are on a spiritual journey. There's nothing good or bad, good or evil about where we are on that journey. We are where we are. And it's a journey we all make. And it's important to know this because the truth you can see is based on where you are at that point. You can be presenting this wonderful truth on this high mountain, but if everybody's down here that you're presenting it to and they can't see it, you're not doing anyone any good. But we can all perceive truth to some degree wherever we are. And so, how does that affect the affirmations? And as I thought of that, we have to go from Buddhism to science. We've all made this trip before here, I know. And I want to talk a little about light waves, or light. And I've talked about this a little before. Not complicated. Light can be two different things. They did some tests many years ago and saw that light was waves. It's waves of energy. And we'll talk about how, but they proved conclusively light is waves of energy. Then they did another test and proved that light comes in what's called quanta, or packets, which makes it matter, a photon. If you're a Star Wars person, or is it Star Trek, they have photon torpedoes. Those are pieces of matter that are what light is. Electrons are the same way, protons, all subatomic particles. So scientists are going, okay, so their energy part of the time, their matter part of the time, when? There must be certain conditions that determine whether they're energy or matter. And so they tried to decide this, to study it, and what what turned out to be the case was they could identify no condition that determined whether it was energy or matter except for one: how we measured it, how we perceived it. If we had a measurement designed to measure matter, we got matter. If we had a design to measure energy, we got energy. And so the only conclusion is that somehow, even though it makes no real sense, light exists both as energy and as matter at the same time. We just see it in the way we choose to perceive it. Now, for those of you whose long-term memory isn't totally gone, mine's partially gone, not totally. Last month, I spoke about some things, and one of those was that we exist in two states. We exist as individual souls, and we exist as one with the divine. You remember this discussion, Stephen?
Yes.
I want to remind him, I know his long-term memory isn't as good.
Yes.
So we exist in both of those states. If you remember, Jesus said, and particularly in the Gospel of Thomas, we are children of the light. We are the light. We come from the light and we return to the light. And so that is telling us that we are the exact same as this aspect of nature which light displays, which is two different states that exist at the same time, and it only exists as one or the other when we perceive it that way. And we exist as both individual souls and as one with the divine, but we have this amazing power to just be one or the other based on how we perceive ourselves. And we're going to do affirmations. When do we do affirmations? When we need something. When we're lacking. When we feel separate from reality, separate from everything else. The one time when our affirmation is least likely to work. And so when we talk about when does affirmation work and when does it not, I sincerely believe that that is based on our state of mind, our state of perception of who we are. And we all know that going to someone to do a treatment for us, such as Joanne and others, works better than doing the treatment for ourselves. How many of us have gone through that? I can help someone else, but man, I can't seem to do this for me. Why? Because when we're doing it for ourselves, we're already seeing ourselves as separate and lacking. And so for affirmations, what we need to do is not see the need first. We need to go back to the source. And we've heard this before. Go back to the source first. Be who we really are. See ourselves as one with the divine. And in that state, affirmation will expand that oneness, will expand that vision, and bring us to where we want to be. So it is.